Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very good. This is a very special day.
Yes.
We're going to find out about the State of the Union. I'm hoping it's in good shape.
Yes.
But I would have to predict that the report basically will be very upbeat. Why would it be anything else? Why tell the people the truth? What's really behind it? And that's part of the problem is the upbeat stuff, and there are some definite upbeat things, but there's always a cost. The one thing a politician will never do is, is tell you how much it costs, and what the long-term conditions are. So we're going to hear a lot of good things, but there will be some things philosophically that we just flat out disagree with them because I imagine the speech will reveal that, having a foreign policy of being tough with your enemies and building more weapons and all, that's going to be a positive, which wouldn't be for us. So it'll be interesting. I didn't always pay as much attention as I maybe should have when I was in Congress because they were really, really tough to attend. But right now we will be paying attention. And tonight, you and I have agreed you can type much faster than I can, and I can talk faster. So we're going to do some tweeting during this speech. Maybe there'll be something that is being said that we can be constructive in mentioning what maybe it would be like if we lived in a republic that emphasized personal liberty and minding our own business, of course, which is our goal. But there are so many things to go over about the real state of the union, and that's essentially what we spend all our time. As a matter of fact, maybe that's what politics is all about forever. It's certainly the issue about Russiagate. What is the truth about it? What is really going on there? Because at the beginning, there were a lot of Republicans that said, oh yeah, if a foreign government got involved, we got to deal with it. And they were the hawks against the Russians. So they emphasized this, and we end up with a special prosecutor and all these things. So we are now continuing to sort that all out. But on economics, it's the other thing, sorting things out. Yeah. Things look pretty good. Housing is up. Car sales are up, but they don't talk about the cost, which is the inflation. And of course, I don't imagine that we will hear much talk tonight about the danger of debt, because debt, according to Keynesian economic theory, all interventions you can handle it as long as it's a certain percentage of GDP, and of course GDP is a fictitious number anyway. It doesn't mean as much as they claim it is. But the big thing is Republicans and Democrats generally aren't that worried about the debt, or they wouldn't spend so much money. If the conservatives were worried about debt, they'd cut something, but nothing really ever gets cut. So I am assuming that we're not going to hear much, except maybe in the speech afterwards, because all of a sudden now you hear Democrats saying, what is he doing there if he cuts taxes and spends money over here? The debt's going to go up, like they really cared. But I don't think in the speech we're going to hear a lot of concern about debt. So what do you think he's not going to say that you might be interested in?
Well, when we were talking about the show today, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't some sort of a political attack for either side, because it's going to be, as you know, and you made a lot of people happy back then because you always gave out those free passes to constituents, and they were always thrilled. You didn't really like going there. I can see why. So it's going to be all a dog and pony show about the politics. But one thing I could say, and you touched on it earlier on, one aspect of the State of the Union that you cannot blame Donald Trump for is the issue of the presidency itself. And I think starting with before he was elected, now as we see more and more the FBI colluding with what we might call the deep state to prevent him from being elected, or at least from hobbling him once he is elected, the Mueller investigation, the precedent that it sets, and you've always not been that happy about a strong president. That's certainly the case. But the precedent it sets for the first year of this presidency to be completely hobbled in every aspect of his presidency almost by this cloud hanging over that was completely constructed out of thin air. Again, it sets a dangerous precedent for future presidents. Certainly the Republicans, if there's a Democrat elected next time, are going to do the same thing. This is now the new game to play. And maybe there's a silver lining if it weakens everyone, but I think it also weakens accountability as well. So I think that's a state of the union that we're in right now that is quite dangerous.
Well, I think digging into the problems that our country faces will be glossed over because everything is okay. The stock market has been high. Who knows how long it'll be up, but the stock market is up, and that makes the rich people richer if you think about it. But it doesn't get into the important issue of bubbles, the malinvestment, and that comes, of course, from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, I assume, will not be mentioned tonight. Nobody's going to say, it's about time we pass that audit the Fed bill. That is not going to happen. And there will be nobody suggesting that trade wars have to be, we have to watch that trade wars aren't good, and putting on tariffs and having currency wars is not good for world economic policy. So that won't be mentioned. The other thing is the direction of the dollar. It's definitely down these last 15 months, significantly so, and I assume that's going to continue. That is big. That is big news, and that is an underpinning of what's really going on. We might see the benefits of the bubble making and the inflation, but the depreciation of the dollar is very, very important. And if you look at a chart since 1971, since we've gotten rid of the Bretton Woods, it has been down pretty steady, purchasing power up. And one of the reasons why we have this wealth discrimination, the wealthy get wealthier, all that QE stuff, drifted in the hands of the bankers and industrialists, investors, and none of it, and they couldn't figure out, well, why aren't the people doing better? Well, it just happens to be that printing money tends to go where it wants to, and in this case, it went directly to the bankers. But also the other thing that they haven't been willing to look at is really, the whole process of stimulating, regulating, and determining the economy. One thing, though, I think the psychology has changed, and there's been a change in attitude. There's been a little bit of improvement with Obamacare. We didn't get rid of it. But I think the perceptions are, and perceptions are very important, that there's less regulation. I think that's given some people some encouragement, but I don't think we'll find that is the answer. I think that structurally it's big debt, it's deficits that have run up, it's economic interventionism, it's spending on the military, it's the welfare state. These things are very structural, and eventually a country runs out of steam because debt and printing money doesn't solve the problem. And I think the State of the Union underneath the surface is a lot different than what is presented to us right now. Unemployment and everything improved, but statistics are statistics, and we know that you cannot rely on the government all the time of saying how wonderful things are. And so I think people would do better, probably never at the State of the Union message, because that's a political stunt. They're not going to talk about the seriousness of what needs to be done. Matter of fact, I never heard very many people in Washington ever talk seriously about the problems that really exist, what the real state of the economy and the state of our country is in.
Yeah, that's true. And you mentioned military spending, and this is an important aspect, I think, of the State of the Union. The President signed in December the National Defense Authorization Act for 2018. It's on the surface $700 billion, but of course when you add in all of other military-related things, it's well over $1 trillion. It's a big bump up. Remember, he wanted $50 billion more, and Congress said, well, we'll see your 50 and give you another 50. So this is the mentality. No amount is too small. $1 trillion modernization of our nuclear weapons program. That's a huge bit of corporate welfare to the military-industrial complex. But there's more of a conceptual aspect, I think, of the state of our union in terms of defense. If you look at Mattis's national defense strategy, he talks about we have emerged from a period of strategic atrophy. And we sort of laughed about this because what he meant by it is that our military has been so depleted, is not getting any money. They're forced to eat baked beans. It's just horrible. When in fact we know that the military spending has increased. But I think he's right in sort of an ironic way, because the atrophy is in our strategy. The strategic atrophy, there's an atrophy in our strategic approach to the world. We have no new ideas. We're doing the same thing over and over. We're sitting there in Syria occupying territory for no reason, nobody knows why. There's no concept of what the role in the U.S. should be. We've talked about it on the show too. It's just a reversion to the Wolfowitz doctrine. We're going to sit here and not let anyone else rise and do whatever we can. And meanwhile, the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians are building a new Silk Road. They're building trade paths and things while we're sitting here on our military saying, you will not pass. And so there is a real atrophy. It's a conceptual, it's a philosophical, it's a strategic atrophy as to our place in the world.
Well, and our place in the world right now seems to be endorsed by most Americans, unfortunately Republicans and Democrats, that they like to be tough dog and they like to run the empire, and that it will always be beneficial to us, even though if they were honest with themselves, they would look at the cost in life, both the lives of Americans versus the lives of the enemy, and they might change their mind on this. But there's one aspect of that policy that is economic as well as foreign policy, and that is the use of sanctions. And sanctions are weapons. They put these sanctions on, and that's essentially what you do when you declare war. You have blockades. You don't let them get any goods and services. But putting on sanctions is just looking for more trouble. It's a provocation, and it just is so unnecessary for them to do that. But we do it all the time. We do it routinely, and a lot of people think that, if we just use sanctions, we won't have to kill anybody and we'll have our way and they'll listen to us. Not realizing that sanctions in combination with an aggressive military, which is what we pursued for 10 years against Iraq, and we continue to do it, not quite as aggressive as it was, it was the sanctions and the bombs that destroyed this country, and it was admitted by our government that 500,000 children probably died because of us bombing the infrastructure and preventing medicines to going in. So I think sanctions shouldn't be a compromise. Compromise. Well, we don't want to invade, and we don't want to send the troops in. We don't want to do that, but we can't ignore it because we have responsibilities. We are the surviving superpower. Of course, another thing that might not be recognized is the surviving of our superpowership is being diminished, and that's what I guess encourages people to say, "Oh, more! We have to be tougher. We'll spend more money, and we have to have bigger bombs." Not realizing that being a super influence in a positive way is absolutely different from that. It's different in a country that, to be a country worth emulating, it would be the emphasis on liberty. We might look tonight when we do our little tweeting about how many times will the word liberty be mentioned? And probably not. But emphasizing liberty and free markets and property rights and minding our own business. Oh, if you don't deal with those Russians, that means you're endorsing everything they do, which is complete nonsense. The same way if you permit civil liberties for individuals who do no harm to others, because they read bad books or they have religions you think are ridiculous, doesn't mean you endorse them, but you endorse that principle. But it's hard for people to comprehend that you can do that if you tolerate something like that, nobody committing aggression against us, say they have problems, they have internal problems, but it's not for our purpose to get involved, to make us a great nation. That doesn't do the trick.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about sanctions, you talk about Iraq and the sanctions that were automatic. And this is one thing that the neocons hate to admit, but it's absolutely a fact. The sanctions that destroyed the infrastructure, that killed a lot of children, that destroyed families, that destroyed the country essentially, those were the fertilizer for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The void left by our invasion, coupled with the sanctions that undermine their society, that was a sprinkling that allowed Al-Qaeda and ISIS to form. But the sanctions, it's almost like the U.S. government is on autopilot. Oh gosh, we don't know what to do. Well, let's just put some more sanctions on. This is the idea. And, Rex Tillerson the other day, and he's really going downhill, I tell you. He was asked about sanctions on North Korea, and he actually said the appearance of more of these ghost ships. And you probably read about these. These are where North Koreans are so desperate for food that they get on these junky ships. They don't have enough gasoline. They go out there and try to fish in the ocean, and they run out of gas. They break down or whatever, and the guys are just out there dying. He said the appearance of more of these ghost ships let us know that our sanctions are working because we're making life more difficult for the North Koreans. Mm-hmm. So that's just the mentality, and you wonder why people aren't that thrilled about our foreign policy.
Yes, and unfortunately, we're not going to see or hear anything about a significant change in foreign policy. Tone is different. It's politicized. We know that. Strategy is a little bit different, but the majority in both parties endorse military intervention, economic intervention. Deficits are okay and necessary. And on the surface, we mentioned before, there are some positive things happening. But what they fail to do is at what cost? Was there a payment? You and I could do pretty well if we had a line of credit. We have bankers who really believed in what we were doing. They loan us $1 million every month. Our standard of living would go way up, but it would be based on borrowed money and not true wealth. And that's what a country does, and it's so deceiving. It can last so much longer. And when you have a reserve currency of the world, you really have gigantic credit. But that's what I see changing. When I see that dollar dropping and our credibility on foreign affairs, that's a little bit of setback. But I think it's a big deal. And in a way, it should be a signal for us to wise up. Maybe we don't have the best foreign policy in the world. Maybe we ought to do something else. Maybe we shouldn't be so intimidated and fearful and insecure with ourselves. We figure, oh no, the Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. All these kind of things. Like, just think of the fear built up against Saddam Hussein, all based on lies. Yeah. And the war on terrorism was greatly exaggerated as well. But you have to do that. How else can you build continued weapons? Yeah. And that will be a continuation, I believe, before the speech and after the speech.
Well, we're running out of time. We didn't even touch on the state of civil liberties. I'll just mention a couple of things without going into detail. The drug war, we're not much better off, unfortunately. Probably worse off. Issue of privacy. We just passed the extension of the FISA amendments, which allows the government to spy on us. Nothing good there. The TSA is still grabbing us every which way. Not a good sign. So I would just close by reminding our viewers, Dr. Paul is going to be on fire tonight. We're going to be tweeting away at the State of the Union. So it's on Twitter at Ron Paul. That's where you can find him. And also another reminder, subscribe to this channel, the Ron Paul Liberty Report YouTube channel. Get all the updates, help us boost our numbers, and help us reach other people. And we thank you so much for viewing.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our program. And that last item that Daniel mentioned about civil liberties, I think, is many times in my mind at the top of the list, because if you think of civil liberties, part of that is owning property, and you can go from there and protect all the good things in a free society. And this is the issue that I think that is ignored the most. It's abused. When you think of all this baloney going on now with the First Amendment and freedom of speech and these things that are going on college campuses, it's really attack on the principles of liberty. And that is what we desperately need. That's why I'm always disappointed when it's rarely mentioned. It's said not talked about or understood. And yet, if you think about it, the founders knew about it and understood it and tried to make a point, made an effort, and quite frankly, it's not been very successful, especially in the last 100 years. That has been ignored. So we have to have a renewed interest and an understanding about what personal liberty is all about, or we can't deal with any of these problems that we've just talked about. But it is the issue of protecting liberty, which means that the individual has a right to his or her life, right to do what they want as long as they don't hurt people, the right to take care, the right to earn money, but an obligation to take care of themselves, and never have the ability to go to government and get special favors. That's a big one, because everybody is lined up in Washington and wanting their special favors, whether it's social favors or financial favors or whatever. But that'll come to an end because we're running out of money, and that's an opportunity for us to restore the principles of liberty. That should be our goal. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.